Homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha. Good evening again. I think tonight I'm just going to launch right into the talk, and we'll see where it takes us. I'll make my usual disclaimer. This will probably be a short talk, but we'll see what happens. So in putting this talk together, I initially started off thinking about calling it mistakes. But I could just as easily have called it forms. So let that percolate in your head as we go through this particular talk. So as we approach the end of this calendar year, many people find it's a time to pause and reflect on the year that's ending. And sometimes with these reflections, joy arises, or sorrow, or embarrassment, bittersweet nostalgia. It can be a time to notice who we are now versus who we were at the beginning of the year. Like thinking back to January of 2022. Seems like such a long time ago. Such a different person I was. Tonight we recited Dogen's Kinjo Koan, and in that there's that famous line, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by the 10,000 things. To be verified by the 10,000 things. So the first part of that phrase is important. The first sentence of that phrase is important. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. It's easy to skip over that in a rush to get to the enlightenment part. When I get to the enlightenment part, like where's that enlightenment stuff? How do I get there? How do I do that? Let's forget the self and get to the enlightenment. But that first part on that progression is to study the Buddha way is to study the self. And it's important, and we can take some time doing that. To find out who we are really, rather than who do we think we are, or what do others tell us about who we are. And oftentimes when people come to practice, I'll talk with them about looking for those mirrors that show us who we are. And some of those mirrors come from noticing our own minds, our own thoughts, our own ideas that reflect back to us who we think we are. Noticing patterns and thoughts around tone or adjectives that we tend to use with ourselves. Do we describe ourselves as bright and funny and energetic? Can we describe ourselves as morose, tired, bored, frustrated? How we use language has an impact, and especially how we use language with ourselves to describe ourselves. And Sangha can also be mirrors for us as we meet together, as we notice what stories we choose to share with each other, or how we choose to hold space with each other, whether or not we're in physical space or just meeting each other on Zoom. How do we relate to each other? Do we find ourselves telling the same stories with Sangha that we share with coworkers or with housemates? Do we listen more? Do we lean in more? Do we pause and let someone finish thoughts before jumping in with our own stories? Sometimes, maybe sometimes not. When we spend time together with Sangha, sometimes it feels different when we're with people who are practicing. When we are with peers who are also walking this path that can be so important, that can feel so important. And sometimes that being with can feel like we're being supported, that there are others there who are also doing this thing, and therefore it makes it easier for me. But then there are other times when being with Sangha can feel more intimidating, because here are also people who value things that I value, and how can I ever live up to that, and what must they think of me? Oof, that can feel like a heavy load. So there's a way in which with Sangha we can start to see how we're holding ourselves. We can see what we value. We can see what we think we have to offer others, even as others are offering support and compassion to us as well. Perhaps that's not your experience, but maybe it is. Other mirrors that we have are reflection practices and precept practices. And I'm starting to think about precepts. We often study precepts in the winter. And this winter, I'll be offering precept studies at Dharma Rain, so I won't be at Wy'East for a number of weeks. But it is starting to percolate in my head, these precept practices that we do, studying them and having time in the evenings to sit and do a recollection practice of drawing the day through the mind and noticing where there's tension in the body relating to a precept. And there can be something useful in just sitting and reflecting on a day at the end of a day, whether or not it's formal meditation at the end of a day or just giving yourself a few moments to sit and think, what happened? What impacted me? What's still lingering here at the end of the day? Or what am I holding on to? These also are mirrors for us to study ourselves. In formal practice, Zen has a lot of opportunities for formal practice. And it's a little more limited on Zoom, but I wanted to bring up some of these formal practices in that one, some of us here just finished a Rohatsu session where there was a lot of forms and a lot of schedule to follow. And two, in thinking forward to our session that we're going to hold with Brightway in March, where we will be having 5 days together in formal practice between the Wy'East Sangha and the Brightway Sangha. And in part of these formal parts, we have one, the following of the schedule, which is a delightful mirror because when that wake-up bell rings in the morning, usually pretty early, instantly there's a self that has an opinion of either like, yes, another day of meditation, or holy cow, it's early in the morning, or somewhere in between. And then we also have the forms that are wrapped around training roles. And these are training roles such as the timekeeper or the presenter. And we have those roles active on Zoom, and I'm very much appreciative of those who have been filling that role for these many years that we've been on Zoom, and even longer before then. So the presenters keep track of the time, and they lead us in chants, and they also handle the temple instruments. So if you were doing formal bows, they would be ringing the inkin to lead us in our bows. I have no idea who's filling what role when we do our retreat in March, but I'm just going to describe some of those roles. We have the role of Jisha, which hasn't been held since we've been on Zoom, but we do have that role filled when we're meeting together in person and in retreat. And then Jisha is the attendant for the doshi, the teacher who is serving as celebrant or making incense offerings on behalf of the Sangha. And so the Jisha has a number of tasks involving working with the doshi up at the altar, making offerings, and watching over the sanzen line when we're offering sanzen, helping people sort of get a sense of what sanzen is about and how it's done. And if there are questions, sort of quietly answering questions and guiding people into that form. But then they also take care of the sanzen room and help keep it clean and tidy and neat. We have the role of Tenzo, who's the cook. And I think in the last joint retreat that we did, that Tenzo role was, I can't remember if one person held it or if it was shared. Sometimes we share it. Sometimes it's just one person, and they're in charge of planning the meals and making sure that all of the shopping is done ahead of time, so we have all the ingredients to make the meals. And they have a lot of responsibility around making sure the food is nutritious and enjoyable and flavorful, and that those with special diets get what they need to eat. And Dogen has written a lot about that particular role, that role of Tenzo, in his writings on sort of how he organized his monastery. And much of what he's written we still bring into play today, especially in terms of having that function of serving as head cook to be one that is really nurturing the entire Sangha. That it's about the food, but it's also not about the food, because it really is providing sustenance and nurturance for the Sangha. The food is what keeps us going in the Zendo. And the food is what brings comfort and helps keep us going throughout a long week of sitting. We have roles around the sacristan or the sacristy team, which takes care of altars and altar cloths and ceremonies and structures and planned ceremonies. That's often a behind the scene role at times. And here we've had a person holding that role to the degree that we can on Zoom. She's got a little camera that gets set up on her altar, and she'll make an incense offering for all of us on Zoom. And then we have a number of opportunities for people to serve as work leaders in a variety of ways. Helping people come into simple tasks as a way to focus the mind and the body, moving. So getting us up off the cushion into some simple task of serving the Sangha that is either cleaning up after a meal or light yard work or light cleaning tasks inside our retreat space. And all of these roles involve some aspect of stepping up to serve. All of these roles involve some aspect of leaning into doing something that we might not ordinarily do. And with that comes being seen in a way that we're not often seen. With that comes making mistakes. Ooh. It's easy for me to sort of laugh about it, but I remember being a very young Jisha and being very terrified. Like stepping into that role of Jisha, like, oh, it's just like dancing. I used to dance. This is fine. I can like just take that incense right up to the altar. And as soon as I started doing it, I'm like, this is nothing at all. Like, it's sort of like dancing, but no, it's not really like dancing. But it is. But all of a sudden there was, because I was holding a particular role, all of a sudden there was this self-consciousness about it. Oh my goodness, everybody's watching. Feels like everybody's watching. People probably aren't watching, but it feels like people are watching. And all of these roles that we fill when we're together in Sangha, whether we're holding a formal role or even just an informal role of being a Sangha member in the Zendo, there's often this sense of this idealized form. This is how a Jisha takes incense to an altar. This is how a Tenzo prepares the breakfast tea. This is how the teacher makes the offering. This is how the precentor fits the Mokugyo for this particular chant. We have some idea about how it's supposed to go. And then what happens is often something different. You know, maybe the incense gets dropped, or the Mokugyo is going fast and the Sangha is going slow, and how do we resolve that? Or the flowers fell over on the altar. Or I forget my verse. What verse do I say at the end of the Dharma? Like, we encounter these things. And this is one of the beauties of holding a form. One of the beauties of the teaching of holding a form is that we don't do it right. We rarely do it right. I just went through an entire session, and like every person I encountered did something a little unexpected. I'm not going to say it was bad. I don't want to pass judgment, but it was a deviation from the form. And those are such beautiful opportunities, because what happens when we deviate from a form is that all of a sudden there's a self that arises. There's a little gasp, a little, and that reaction could be excitement, that reaction could be embarrassment, that reaction could be mortification, that reaction could be playfulness, that reaction could be like despair. I can't say what the reaction is, but all of a sudden when there's that noticing of something's off, there's a self that arises. And there's this beautiful opportunity to notice what we do when we catch ourselves doing something like that, making a mistake, making a deviation from form, making something unexpected. What is our go-to? Because that reaction is often not something we've thought out ahead of time. There's no way to think out ahead of time, like all of the contingencies for all of the things that could go sideways. So, we learn. And we watch other people seeing us learn. And there's a space there for vulnerability or fear or wonder. What happens when you enter into that vulnerable space with someone else? Do those defenses come down, or do they go up? What happens when the Jisha catches the precentor looking over and smiling? Do you smile back? Sometimes we don't think about that. It's just either the smile comes or it doesn't come. But there's a moment there that can be quite connecting and quite intimate. Just a glance and a smile shared between two people in the middle of this complex unfolding of a ceremony can be beautiful. It can also be not what the script calls for. That's okay, right? It's okay. The way we learn is through making mistakes. The way we learn is by deviating from, not consciously, but like unconsciously deviating from what is expected, and then realizing, actually, I do need to pay attention there. Actually, I need to start on the other foot. Or I need to start the tea earlier. Or, ooh, actually, if you leave the tea balls in for too long, that's not a good thing. It makes it easier to remember. So we're not just arbitrarily following some set of rules, but we actually know why it is we're doing the things that we're doing. We know why it is that a ceremony unfolds a particular way. It goes into the body. The learning goes into the body that way. It's not just a conceptual in my head thing. We do this with walking kinhin, right? So even if we're not in a particular role, we're in the zendo in the Incan rings, and we turn the wrong way, there's a self. And either we immediately turn around and our cheeks turn red. Okay, let me rephrase that. I turn around and my cheeks turn red. Or perhaps there's a moment of confusion or a scowl or a pointing. We negotiate how to do this, but sometimes it's that having a self arise and go, huh, that we pay attention a little bit more to which way we should turn, or we learn why it is that certain rows turn certain directions. We can engage in this in a particular way. In the teachings of the six realms, it said that in the Deva realm, everything is perfect, everything is beautiful, everything smells good and is soft to the touch and is beautiful to the eye, and there's no hunger or there's no discomfort. But there's also not a lot of reason to practice. And in the sutras, there's often discussion of when the Buddha is teaching, often the gods or the devas come down and listen to the teaching, and they're delighted by it, but they also don't engage it very deeply. And the deepest questions are coming from the Buddha's disciples in the human realm. That there's an emphasis or an oomph or a like wanting to lean into how do we get relief from this suffering? And the gods up in the Deva realm aren't too worried about that. They're comfortable. If we get through our practice and we get through our engagement with Zen forms and like nothing ever challenges us, well, things can be pretty good and pretty comfortable, which is a good thing. But we might not learn as much about ourselves as we would if we had leaned a little bit deeper into that willingness to be uncomfortable or willingness to be seen turning the wrong way in the Zendo, or making these little mistakes. And the good thing about making little mistakes with Zen forms, and I'm labeling them little mistakes because most often they are little mistakes, the more we can get comfortable with that discomfort, our own discomfort around being seen as making mistakes or being seen by others, the easier it is to do that out in the world outside the Zendo. Become less attached to having to put forth some persona that is perfect or always says the right thing or always does the right thing. We can be ourselves a little bit more, lean into that authenticity a little bit more. Feel awkward with someone and just like, this is awkward, isn't it? We can be in an awkward space together. That's okay. I think that's one of the best things Zen has taught me. I know how to feel awkward. It's okay. In thinking of this here at the end of the year, looking back at the beginning of the year and wondering who I was, Can also hold similar questions in terms of making mistakes. Who was I before I made that mistake? Who was I after I made that mistake? Where is that self? What changed? How subtle can I be noticing the nuances that arise with that particular experience? And I want to close with just this sense of, as a Sangha, how do we hold each other in such a way that allows for growth and learning, and seeing the ways in which we deviate from our ideal forms without judgment? How do we work with our own mind and our own feelings as they relate to discomfort? To study the Buddha ways, to study ourselves. Can we lean into studying ourselves, our whole self, and not just the parts that we identify with or describe ourselves as? And that's my talk. Questions and comments are welcome.
I was really glad that you elaborated when you said, well, if the Jisha looks over and sees the smile and smiles back, then you continued and said, yeah, that was a warm. I instantly, as soon as you said that, I was like, oh no, what's the right answer? But you filled in the pieces afterwards.
Shucks, I should have left you with that ambiguity.
Well, I like the idea of looking back. How did I do this year? Was there progress? I mean, I think many of us are geared towards, oh, I'm going to set intentions for the new year, and forgetting, I could look back and say, well, how'd I do? I mean, what did I do and how'd I do? And I don't remember what my intentions were last year, but did I meet them? I mean, I think that looking back can be really valuable, and I will incorporate that also. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
You reminded me of how sometimes when you're not here and Shintai's not here, one of us will spontaneously volunteer to do a closing verse. And when I do it, I never get it right, but I always laugh. It's always I feel very supported by the Sangha.
I always tend to get the closing verses confused because we have one for Dharma talks and one for classes, and I never remember which is which.
I always, I've read someplace kind of what you were saying, reflect on the day, and I have it on my computer. So like I try every day just to reflect on the day, and not just the good things, but the whole day, you know, like not in a lot of detail or analysis, but just kind of generally, how do I feel about the day? And it's okay if it wasn't the best day, and it's okay if it was. And I think that's one of the benefits for me of reflecting on the day, is I realize they're not all going to be great, which is, you know, I mean, a little different for me. I want them all to be great, and oftentimes in my past they have been. So it's good, I think, to reflect. I have another comment too. So your examples were good about making a mistake. And I mean, I remember turning the wrong way when we were walking, and you know, being nervous about when I was first doing, you know, the song, and it's like, oh, oops, and then going too slow, going too fast, and then I got over that because everybody made me feel so comfortable, and then I didn't want to wear shoes, but my feet hurt if I didn't wear them because of my ankle problem. So I think you or somebody said, you can wear shoes. And I'm like, okay, thanks. But I didn't want to ask because nobody else was wearing shoes. So just I mean, that in some ways is support, it's like, don't have to suffer with. I like that. But the other thing about mistakes is when you were talking, I was thinking about mistakes like going the wrong way, but I was also thinking about mistakes in, I'm not sure how to say it, but changes in body, mental, physical form. Like I had to acknowledge, like acknowledging maybe more afraid of walking on ice than I used to be because of slipping and breaking my ankle. And I don't want to be that way, but I am. And somebody helped me the other day from book group go out the door because it was the snow. And I felt like I'm weak because I don't need help. But his wife goes, help me downstairs. And I don't need help, but I did, I was nervous about it. So I guess that to me aligns a little bit with your use of the word mistake. It's allowing myself to be supported, and it doesn't mean I'm weak. It means I had a physical problem that is still a problem, and everybody accepts that and wants to help rather than looking at me as though I'm not strong anymore. Except for me, that's how I look at it. But that's how, to me, I don't know if that fits in your thoughts about mistake, but that's what came to mind for me.
So something along the lines of just having a view that might be distorted. Is that what you're sort of referencing there, Trish?
Yeah, and being vulnerable,
Yeah.
when you think of myself, I've always been really strong and do anything I want to do. I don't really need anybody. And, it's not so true anymore.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Making mistakes can certainly bring up that sense of vulnerability. And that can be a very tender place to be.
Yeah.
And I was a little hesitant in using the word mistake throughout the talk, just because it has such an implicit judgment in it, that there is a right way to do things.
Yeah,
if I'm talking about mistakes, then there must be a right way or a correct way. But I think the way Zen tends to use mistake is that it softens it a little bit. It's not so harshly judgmental as the way that I often hear the word mistake used. But when we add that connotation of like, here's a place for growth and learning, then mistake becomes a good thing. And when we lean into that vulnerability and that willingness to see who we are in that moment, that also leads to growth and learning. And it may be for you that some of that growth and learning is happening around physical ability. That as bodies change, then there is a need to sort of reassess and redefine, what am I actually capable of? What can I do? What can I not do?
Yeah.
I've had
For
to
me,
do a
it's
lot of, go ahead.
using the handrail on the stairs.
Uh-huh.
Hey, all of a sudden I'm willing to say, yeah, better use the handrail, just like they said. Not that I'm getting old, but I'm getting old. It's
older.
For me, it's getting mocked for walking around with my hands like this to keep my balance.
That too. Yep.
I have to laugh at myself in my head, otherwise I would feel very defensive about the way sometimes people aren't very polite about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a harsh mirror held up to me today. I think there must be times when I see the self and I'm pleasantly surprised, but I can't think of any. And this one was particularly brutal. I had bought a pair of paddock boots, and they were $200, which isn't a huge amount, but it was, it's not nothing. And they didn't fit. So I put them back in I returned them, and my credit card was credited. They took half of that for a restock fee. And I was like, oh, how dare you? And I just got all huffed up about it. And I left a phone message and I wrote an email. And and they wrote back right away. Kayena was the woman's name. And she was like, okay, well, you walked around in these. They were a mess. She said, you were in the barn with these. You wore them. We can't resell these. And she included pictures. And I was like, oh, I kind of did actually. You know, I didn't wear them for a long time, but I did wear them outside. And so I had to, you know, she was right. I mean, I did wear them outside. I cleaned them, but I guess I didn't clean them very well. And so I really had to think about how to respond to that, you know? I mean, I was like caught red-handed. There was no way out. I had to think of how to respond to this. So I really sat with it for you know, as long as I could bear, but it was really, really painful for me. I was like, I was flooded with this sense of shame, like you can't even believe. I was like, I just didn't, you know, I'm just looking for a way out, you know, and there wasn't one. And I felt just full of shame. And yeah, so I wrote her back and I said, well, you know what? I really appreciate this was a little harsh for me, but I appreciated that you just told it like it was. And you know what? You're right. You know, I did wear them outside. I thought they were clean, but I cleaned them really well. And there's a reason why I'm a prototype tester for this horse clothing company, because they call me the destroyer and I can destroy stuff in like 15 seconds. And and then I started to kind of laugh about it because they actually do call me that. And so I think that the lesson for me was just not to take myself so incredibly seriously every second, you know. But it was a mirror, you know. It really was. This big inflated sense of self, you know, that's just so important and can't ever be wrong and knows everything, you know. It was pretty brutal.
I appreciate your willingness to see yourself in that mirror. It's not an easy thing to do.
And to
And
share
it's not
that
easy
with
to,
them.
yeah. It's not easy to tell another person, oh yeah, you're right. If there's a difference of a view or difference of opinion. Oh yeah, you are right. How are you doing right now, Tuco?
Well, that was sort of like a confessional for me, so I'm not sure how I feel about that. But thank you for asking. That's thoughtful. Yeah. How do I feel? I don't know. Maybe I'll know later.
That's a fair answer.
Yeah.
We've got about 5 more minutes. If anybody else wants to say something or ask something.
I loved when you said, how'd you word it? About who am I now from the beginning of the year? Who was I at the beginning of the year? Not the goals. It was a very different take on it. Not did I have my goals, my intention at the beginning, and then did I meet those? It was more of who was I at the beginning of the year and who am I now? It's definitely a different perspective and gives me something to practice with to kind of look at. Thank you.
Yeah. I am less interested in tasks accomplished and more interested on the impact that the doing of tasks leaves. The softenings, the changes, the leanings in, the learnings, all of that.
That is a good question. Glad you brought that up. Because I was thinking when you said that I don't really know. It's like some ways I'm better, some ways I'm not better, some ways I'm in a different place. And so, but to get away from those more maybe detailed or, ups and downs and look at really sort of, I guess, for lack of a better word, the trend, like trying to look at it from a little bit different perspective rather than, well, I had a good month here, but then I had this happen, but then I did that, but that was a really fun time I did down there. So look at it as a whole and not in pieces. And that's what, when you just were talking, I was thinking, yeah, looking at it as a whole from the year, where am I sort of spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally? Yeah, good question.
Is there more capacity for compassion? Is there resilience? Is there flexibility? Is there graciousness with others? Is there kindness? And has that deepened or broadened?
Well, and as you look at your practice of, have I practiced a lot this year? Has it made a difference? If you look at it through a practice lens, like, okay, because I had a scenario like Taco's today, so I have to say, okay, a year ago, January last year, if I would have had that scenario, would I have responded different? Has my practice supported me in a way? Have I gleaned enough from my practice, grown to respond differently today than I would have a year ago? Why did I respond like that today? Because that was a lot like I would have responded in my 20s. So that it gives you really food for thought of not just who I was a year ago and who I am now, but also how we can really kind of quickly, if we don't think about our practice, revert really quickly, like go to that habitual stuff that years ago or whatever. So really gives you something to really sit with.
Thanks, Ron.
Just responding to what she just said, that would imply that I shouldn't just be looking back to last January, but okay, in the last 50 years, yes, I've made a lot of progress. That we all have grown exponentially, but maybe, we still have our ups and downs, but our ups are better and our downs aren't quite as disastrous as they used to be. So we can look at it from that point of view too.
Thank you.
All right, please make a show. The universe is the boundless sky, just as the lotus is not surrounded by the water that's... Let me try again. The universe is the boundless sky, just as the lotus is not wed by the water that surrounds it. The mind is immaculate and beyond the dust. Let us bow to the highest Lord. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, bodhisattvas, mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, Maha Prajna Paramita.
That was totally staged.
That totally was not staged.
No, it's happened before.